Today, I'm going to go over in depth some extremely intricate things you need to know about when using a flatbed scanner, and how to optimize your setup for the best possible scans. I'm making this series of videos as a way to share my research so you don't have to figure it out yourself. The information in this video is geared towards scanning film, but if you're scanning things that aren't film, this info may still help you. I have an Epson V550, however I'm going to try and keep this as broad as possible, so I'm not going to be talking about many scanning settings. I'll save that for another video specifically focused on the Epson scan software. But I am going to end up talking about the Epson line a lot. Who knows, maybe your special boy flatbed scanner is like a zillion times better than mine and has none of the issues that I'm about to address. I'll also have another video going in depth comparing scanning with a camera versus scanning with a flatbed, so make sure you get subscribed so you don't miss that. Also, go follow me on Instagram. So you must first understand that scanning film is hard, and that flatbed scanning has major advantages, but also lots of disadvantages, just like every other form of scanning that currently exists. In general, the color resolving ability of a flatbed scanner is probably the best that exists. But the image is sometimes not as detailed as scanning with a dedicated film scanning device or a camera. And the detail or sharpness factor is mainly what I'm going to be focusing on today. There are a few reasons why people claim flatbeds are not as sharp as other methods, mainly the focal point of the scanner, the optical limitations of the scanner, and how the film is held. There's also post-processing of the resulting image. Most people don't really know how to sharpen a scan from a flatbed, but I'll save that talk for another video. Again, this video is mainly about the physical, technical techniques when it comes to scanning film with a flatbed scanner. One big problem with flatbed scanners is that flatbeds, for the most part, are consumer devices, maybe prosumer if you want to use that term. So the manufacturing tolerances on them are pretty loose. This means that you might have the exact same scanner that I have, and you could be getting significantly sharper or softer images than I get. Each flatbed scanner is unique, even within the exact same product line. It's simply unavoidable. We're talking about fractions of millimeters of difference here. And once the scanner's been shipped around the world, who's to say the thing is still as it was when it left the factory? Now, I assume some higher end flatbeds are better. I've seen comparisons between the low end Epsons and the high end Epsons, and the higher ones are usually better. But this could be because of a few key differences, or just by random chance that the focal point of the scanner was closer to where the film was held. Obviously, the higher end scanners should have better optics that should be able to resolve more details of an image. The higher end Epsons all have something they call the dual lens system. Apparently, when you have one of these scanners that has the dual lens system, in the scanning software you select the film with film holder option, and it switches to a different lens. The normal lens is calibrated to have a focal point directly on the surface of the scanner glass. But then there's the second lens that's used when scanning film in the film holder. I believe this second lens has a much thinner focal depth, and it's always in focus somewhere above the glass. The film holders for these high-end models even have height adjustment feet because, again, the manufacturing tolerances are going to put the focal point at a completely different spot for each individual scanner. There's also a lot of confusion as to what DPI each of the lenses in the dual lens system is. If you have one of these scanners, I would try and stick to 4800 DPI no matter what setting you use, in case the lens you use doesn't support 6400, causing it to possibly switch to the other lens. So dual lens or not, you can't control exactly where the sharpest point above the flatbed scanner bed is at, but you can figure out where it is, and you can adjust where the film is held so that it's in the exact focus point. By the way, if you haven't seen my video on how anti-Newton ring glass doesn't exist and is a scam, you should probably go watch that now because you're more than likely gonna need this type of glass if you want good scans. Yes, I know that sentence doesn't make sense, but go watch the video and you'll understand. I would also recommend taking a photo of something extremely sharp, something with lots of small repeating lines. I took a photo of my computer screen showing a test pattern, and I was able to use the interference pattern it created on my viewfinder to achieve nearly perfect focus. Try using black and white too, because it's a lot easier to see the differences between scans than it is in color. One important thing about film you must understand is that all film has a bit of curve to it. And as far as I know, there isn't a method of holding film perfectly flat that doesn't involve using extra glass or some kind of plastic shell or putting something on top of it. And those are dubious if it actually gets it perfectly flat. For example, here's a little film holder I made for doing single frame camera scans. And as you can see, it's pretty flat, but there's still ever so slightly a little bit of distortion to it. And my film was already pretty flat to begin with. Just that tiny little fraction of a Rogan is possibly enough to create less than perfect results. On my flatbed, I get a little bit more leniency with the area that I consider to be in focus. But still, you're going to have to find a way to hold your film flat, and that usually involves etched glass, aka anti-Newton ring glass, as it's falsely called. I talk a bit about how to retrofit the Epson film holders in the A&R glass video. You might not need to do anything at all if the film holder works for you. The higher end Epson ones seem to be pretty usable. If you decide to build a custom holder, be careful, because on my scanner, if you put anything in this small area, the scanner will refuse to scan in transparency mode. This might not be the case on higher end Epsons that have the larger transparency unit, but I don't have one of those to test. Also remember, you want to have your negatives as straight as possible in the scanner, but you don't have to go too crazy with this. If you scan your image at high enough DPI, then rotating it slightly in post isn't really going to hurt image quality. Once you have a way of perfectly flattening your film and holding it in place, you can start doing tests. For me, I decided to design and 3D print a custom modular film holder that would allow me to have fine adjustment over the exact height that the film is held above the glass. This was mostly a waste of time because even though I have an auto bed leveler and my 3D prints have great first layers, that doesn't help when your printing surface is warped from the factory. Like, look at this thing, it's not even flat. So I decided to heat my holder in a toaster oven between two sheets of glass, and that certainly helped flatten it quite a bit, but it also warped the hell out of my holder. It doesn't really help that my measurements were slightly off anyway, so the upper strip is cut off a bit. As it turns out, and I had figured as much before even designing this holder, that my personal scanner gets the sharpest scans when the film is directly on the glass. I'm not releasing this holder design because it sucks balls. If you're doing direct glass scanning, you need a holder that has weight to it and has some way of applying downward force on the etched glass to fully flatten your negatives. Both of these things are kind of hard to do with a crappy 3D printed part. Now you, the viewer, you probably don't have a 3D printer, and if you're considering buying one, stay the hell away from Creality unless you don't value your time. And you probably don't want to design a custom holder with different heights to test which one is the best. So how the hell are you going to find the most in-focused height above your glass? Well, there's a few ways of doing this. The first thing I would do is an A/B test. Take a scan with the film in the film holder, then take a scan with the film directly on the scanner's glass. If the scan on the glass has more detail, then either your scanner's focal point is inside of the scanner's glass bed, like I think mine is, or it's just slightly above the glass, which is far more ideal, but still might require a custom height holder. Now, if the scan in the film holder is sharper and more detailed, then congratulations, your scanner is special, and it probably means your scanner's focal point is definitely above the glass somewhere. But you still may need some kind of custom holding solution if that focal point is below your film holder. If you have the higher end Epson scanners, the included film holders actually have little adjustment feet, so you can raise and lower them a little bit without needing anything else. The Epson film holders aren't that bad if your film is pretty flat to begin with, but anything really curly is just a nightmare to work with. You can test higher focal points with any holder just by using sticky notes or something very thin and adding more height. The alternative to A/B testing is getting hyper-specific. Get two rulers. When I did this, I just used one ruler, and this thing's like really bendy, so my calculations aren't perfect, but it's fine for demonstration purposes. Put one ruler directly flat on the glass, and the other one have an edge directly on the glass, and the other edge propped up on something to lift it off the glass. I just used a little plastic SD card holder thing, which is 4.5 millimeters thick, plus the height of the scanner's body above the glass, which is about 2 millimeters, giving me a total height above the glass of 6.5 millimeters on one side. Now scan it. I have to use reflective mode, or else I'm not going to be able to see the ruler. But if you have a transparent ruler, then you could probably do it in transparency mode, and that might be your only option if you have one of those dual lens scanners that change focal points, since I don't think you can use the other lens in reflective mode. You could also just use a strip of film stretched and taped between two areas. But once you have a scan, it's time to use some math, or actually, use this right angle triangle calculator website, because ain't nobody got time for no sine and cosine nonsense. I know how high my ruler is, so for edge A I'll put in 6.5, and because I'm only using the one ruler I'll put in 266.7 for edge C. That's about the distance from the bed to the point that the ruler touches my little plastic thingy. Now I just hit calculate and it gives me the remaining measurements. If you use two rulers, you can sanity check yourself by making sure edge B is equal to C, what you see on your ruler that's laying flat. But don't go crazy with this, it's not going to be totally perfect. The important number we get here is actually angle A, which in my case is 1.4 degrees. And using this, you can now calculate the height above the glass at any distance along the ruler to find your exact ideal focus point. As you can see in my result, the whole thing is pretty sharp. The V550 has a pretty deep depth of field, but when you zoom in, you can clearly see it starts getting softer as the ruler gets higher above the glass. So for me, this kind of proves that my focus point is either directly on the glass, and that my scanner is just not optically capable of resolving more detail, or my truly sharpest point is inside or under the glass itself. So for me, I scan directly on the glass. But I've seen people who have the exact same scanner that I have say they get the sharpest scans by raising their film holder up a little bit. You can use the ruler technique to find your ideal focus point. Just look at your scan for the area you think is the sharpest, or find two opposite sides of blurriness, and the center of those should be your ideal focus height. Take the distance on the ruler from 0 to that point, and put it in the calculator as edge C. For this example, I'll use 4 inches, or 101.6 millimeters. This is where my scanner would be noticeably out of focus in my example. For my angle, I'll put in the angle of 1.4 degrees. Now calculate, and edge A is my height above the glass in millimeters, 2.46 millimeters, but because my ruler is curved, I know it isn't actually that high. It's probably less than that. My Epson film holder holds the film about 1 millimeter above the surface of the glass, so it isn't going to be as sharp as on my scanner bed. Now there is of course the possibility that scanning in reflective mode changes the focal point of the scanner in the firmware somehow, but I really doubt it, at least with my scanner. The ones with a dual lens system I talked about earlier more than likely do this. There's also the possibility that these little dots on the film holder that the scanner looks at during calibration tells the scanner to focus somewhere completely differently. Again, I really don't think this is the case, but it's a possibility that would be super annoying if true. I haven't tested this, and I don't think it matters on my lower end flatbed. But hey, if someone wants to buy me a V850 Pro, I'll gladly run tests for you. When you look at my results, I would say the ruler is mostly in focus up to about 1.5 inches. And if I do the math there, 38.1 millimeter is the distance, which gives me a height of less than 0.9 millimeters of in-focus area, which is actually kind of crazy when you think about how much leniency this scanner gives you. You have almost an entire millimeter of mostly in-focus area to work with, and possibly more that I can't prove, since I'd need to measure below the surface of the glass. Just to make sure, I did test with my custom film holder, which holds the film about 0.2 millimeters above the glass. And my results on that versus the results directly on the glass are pretty much identical. Using this holder would probably give me better results in general, just because I wouldn't have to worry about straightening the film, and I wouldn't have to worry about getting Newton rings when scanning color film. But remember, I melted the damn thing, and now it's like warped back already to not being flat again. So what about you? What if you need to hold your film higher or slightly lower than the stock film holder? If your focal point is below the holder but above the glass, a semi-permanent solution would be using layers of optical tape built up around the edges of where your film would sit, thus creating a holder of sorts that your film can rest on while you place etched glass on top of it to flatten it out. You could probably also use capped-on tape. I think this shouldn't leave residue on the glass, but it might in the long term. I don't know. You could of course design a custom holder like I did, or even just rig one together with paper and cardboard or something. If your focal point is above the factory film holder, then you can just shim up the holder using basically anything. As long as you keep it consistent across the entire film holder, you should be good. Then there are aftermarket film holders, I assume, which would let you use some kind of screw system or something to raise and lower the height of the film above the scanning bed. Then there is also fluid mounting. Using everything you've learned in this video so far, do you think wet mounting would really improve anything at all? I've already shown that my scanner has almost 1mm of leniency of what I consider in focus. Would adding water magically make it any better? People who sell wet mounts claim that it can reduce dust. Okay, yeah, that's true since you're like washing it off of the film with water, but it also says it can reduce grain? Huh? So it softens the image? Though even the most in-focus flatbeds are probably not going to resolve the film at true grain level detail. Etched glass can allegedly induce extra grain, but I'm pretty sure most wet mounts use normal non-etched glass anyway, since it's the water that removes the Newton rings and not the glass. The really wild claim about wet mounting is that it improves dynamic range, saturation, and increases contrast. Nah, that has to be marketing BS. Though I suppose there is some theoretical optical phenomena to consider. Maybe those little layers of water collimate the light in a better way, thus increasing the image quality, but it really seems like nonsense, especially on a low-end flatbed that can't even resolve those minute extra details. Using fluids certainly can eliminate Newton rings, but if your film is super curly, you're still going to be screwed. Wet mounting relies on you sandwiching the film between glass, fluid, usually water, and transparent sheets. But these sheets don't really apply that much pressure to the film unless you're willing to do some creative tape work. If your film has any significant spring or curl to it, then I don't think any form of fluid mounting is going to work for you. I suppose larger format films often have significantly less curl, and wet mounting is usually reserved for large format stuff. If you're dealing with larger format films that are very flat, and you don't want to deal with dust, and your wet mount can be adjusted, then maybe fluid mounting is a good solution for you, as opposed to devising your own dry mount. It's large format, so you might as well give it the best chance it's gonna get. In general, I think wet mounting is a massive waste of time. It already takes forever to do scans with flatbed scanners. Even loading the film takes time if you're doing it super carefully, wearing gloves, cleaning the dust. I think the demonstrated benefits of wet mounting in various videos are actually just the benefits of having the film flat, planar with the glass surface, and at the exact correct focal height for the scanner. I really don't think it has anything to do with using fluid at all. I'm sure if you're interested in flatbed scanning, you've seen Nick Carver's Epson film scanning technique comparison video. Sadly, in this video, his methodology isn't exactly the greatest or the clearest. He mentions a few highly specific factors that are simply incorrect that might lead people to believe certain things about flatbed scanners that are not true. For example, he states that when something is scanned on the bed, the scanner has to switch to a low-resolution lens, but really the scanner doesn't know where the object being scanned is. With dual-lens scanners, you have to set the lens in the software manually. Anyway, clearly this guy's scanning technique is flawed in certain ways. I guarantee he's using Silverfast 2, which is doing a pretty much unique color inversion on each image differently. You can see it clearly in the color between these two images. Different color, and one has slightly more noticeable edge fringing, which he discusses in the video. But I think this is probably because the Epson fluid mount isn't as in focus, since the film heights are completely different. He's also scanning through 2 layers of glass, since the film on the Epson wet mount is mounted above the second glass layer instead of below it. I assume that the higher end Epsons with the second lens, that the amount of in-focus area is extremely small compared to the nearly 1mm of mostly in-focus area that mine has. Just that 1 or 2 millimeters of extra glass is going to make the scan out of focus. And the extra glass might cause more optical artifacts that lead to the color fringing he's getting. But color fringing isn't always just caused because of the film focus point or scanning through extra glass. It could even be caused by the scanner settings, though I suppose these settings could just be making the optical issues more apparent. Take a look at this image. And now this one. This first one was scanned at 4800 dpi, which is the setting I do all of my scans at. The second one is 6400 dpi, which is the advertised optical resolution of all current Epson scanners. Notice how much more fringing there is. And just to make sure I'm not crazy and that this fringing isn't actually on the negative itself, here's a camera scan of the same image. I mean, maybe there's fringing on the negative, but I think it's more likely that when scanning at 6400 dpi on my scanner, I get chromatic aberrations. But your scanner might be completely different, even if you have the same one I do. Here's the same test on a different part of the image. You can clearly see the 6400 dpi one has more fringing on certain areas. I'm not going to rule out the possibility that maybe my scanner isn't causing the fringing and maybe it really is on the negative, and that maybe on 6400 DPI mode the epson is just accurately resolving the color data, but it's very unlikely. It's probably just an optical anomaly when switching to 6400 DPI. Also, don't listen to the people that claim that a certain scanner only has an effective DPI. I guarantee those DPI tests didn't take into consideration focus height or do testing across multiple different examples of the same scanner. As I've said, yeah, the optics on flatbeds are not always going to resolve the finest details past a certain point, but I doubt the testing methodology of the one website that publishes these effective DPI measurements is very accurate or applicable to the minutia of these flatbed scanners. That site also sells a scanning service. Gotta pay off that $25,000 virtual drum somehow, huh? By the way, virtual drum scanners are just CCD scanners, just like a flatbed. Back to the video, color fringing isn't the only weird image artifact you can get with a flatbed scanner. No, this next one is far more annoying. Take a look at this photo. Do you see this big line across the image? Here's the same photo exactly as I got it when scanned in a lab. Ignore the color difference, they're irrelevant, but you can see no line. Was my film damaged after they scanned it? This is something that can happen, but what if I simply move my film to a different position on the scanner, just slightly down a little bit, but still in the left holder? I even tilted it so if the line was on the film, it would be noticeable. And you can see no line. How about this image? See the big line? Here's the exact image, but this time I scanned it in the right film holder instead of the left. Again, ignore the massive color and noise differences. These are from me testing different inversion software. If you look closely at the bottom, you can see lines in both of the images in the exact same place, and what that tells me is that those lines are actually on the negative and are some kind of damage. So why does the line disappear when I move the negative somewhere else? It's because I probably have some kind of scratch or dirt inside my scanner somewhere. Look, you can even see these lines in a video I made a while ago where I was scanning something that isn't even film. Of course, I've cleaned the glass bed, the transparency glass, and the etched glass, but it still appears. It could be dirt on the opposite side of the glass, and it could even be possible that these streaks are actually caused by some kind of faulty component in the scanner. Maybe that's why I got this thing for so cheap, though I'm not so sure about that because it seems like it goes away the further down the scan gets when scanning on the same side of the holder. It could also just be some kind of reflection that's happening inside the scanner, but this is just another problem you might face and something you gotta look out for. Oh, and look at that picture again. Here's the scan I got from a not-so-great local lab. There's the streak, but it's in a different spot. So whatever they were using also has this issue. This can happen on dedicated film scanners. I don't know what they used since all the scans I got back from them had no EXIF data, but maybe someone watching will recognize the file naming scheme. I've seen people with this same problem with my same scanner claimed they fixed or reduced it by cleaning these two little black things on the scanner. Apparently these are some kind of sensor that can get dirty and cause various issues, so make sure these are cleaned as well. And the last thing I'll mention is scanning uncut rolls of film. Basically, don't do it, just cut them up. At least with my scanner this is the case. I mentioned earlier that placing anything in this small area causes the scanner not to scan. Well, if you have a long strip of film, you would have to move it out of the way of this area somehow, like this, except in this case the lid is going to bend your film. But yeah, my flatbed can't really do uncut film in this direction. Yours might be different. If it wasn't for this calibration sensing area, I could just have the film running out of the back of the scanner. If I do want to do uncut rolls, then I have to have the film coming in and out of the sides of the scanner, which is hardly ideal since I'll only be able to scan 1 or maybe 2 frames at a time. Again, the higher end epsons may be different here. Here are some bonus tips for flatbed scanning. I would recommend getting a couple medium and short pile microfiber cloths so you can clean the dust off the scanner more effectively. Also, if you don't have one of those little camera sensor cleaner air blower things, I don't know what it's called, get one, because it's better to blow the dust off of stuff before wiping it away. It's pretty pathetic that even the latest, most top of the line Epson scanners came out in 2014, nearly 10 years ago. Flatbeds have the most potential for scanning film, but none of them that currently exist are perfect. You also have to consider the optical limitations of your camera setup. You can't get sharper scans when the image on the negative isn't in focus. This is why I do occasional camera scanning on certain frames to sanity check myself. I hope in the future someone makes an affordable scanner that completely fixes all of the issues in this video. Believe me, if I had the funding, I'd design one myself. I have some ideas. Slow scanning CCDs are able to capture color data in a way that doesn't really exist anywhere else, but the optics involved and even the size of the sensor creates a limitation as to what details can be resolved. So hopefully this video helped you figure out how to get the most out of your flatbed scanner. If you have an Epson, I'll be doing a follow-up video going over all of the settings in the Epson scan software, explaining what they do, as well as showing the way I convert my negatives, so get subscribed so you don't miss that.